mystery of missing Las Vegas girl appears to be unanswered 23 years later. Carla Rodriguez is her name. Carla Rodriguez, who was 7 years old, enjoyed riding her bike, playing, and skipping school. On the day she went missing, she did just that on October 20th, 1999. Carla vanished in 1999, and police in Las Vegas were not alerted for more than 12 hours. The 7-year-old child was frequently seen wandering the streets of her central Las Vegas neighborhood alone, and her family felt she was secure. Carla was last seen on October 20th, 1999, and no one has seen her since, according to the Metropolitan Police Department. After Rodriguez was last seen alone, playing in the area with her bike, the brown-haired child with a gap-toothed smile vanished from her neighborhood in the shadows of what was then known as Trade-O-Sphere near St. Louis Avenue and Maryland Parkway. The case is still unresolved after 20 years. Dan Long and Terry Miller, cold case homicide detectives, took over the investigation 2 years ago and are now approaching it with new eyes. Any information, no matter how tiny, is appreciated. Long said on a fine day as he sat at Metro headquarters with other law enforcement authorities who have collaborated to find Carla. Carla was meant to attend an English language lesson at Park Elementary School on October 20th, 1999. As per Metro, few ladies were 16 years old, 14 years old, and 20 years old when they vanished between 2002 and 2004. Metro detectives get between 6,000 and 7,000 new missing person cases every year. Some of the incidents involve serious misunderstandings between family and friends. Others feature grown-ups who sought to vanish and start afresh somewhere new for various reasons. Runaways or youngsters kidnapped by a parent during a custody struggle are examples of juvenile instances. Carla's mother was previously assumed to be walking her part of the way to school, but Long detectives said one fine day that he's not sure if Carla's mother walked her. Carla didn't show up for a class that day, and her movements for the following 12 hours remain unclear. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. According to Detective Holly, Carla's father realized she wasn't home from school that afternoon, but he assumed she was out with neighborhood friends. The family resided in a residential area south of downtown on the 700 block of East St. Louis Avenue. The FBI has looked for Carla in Mexico several times since then, looking into the possibility that her extended relatives abducted her. Carla's case is one of around 200 cold cases that detectives in the missing persons detail are still looking into, hoping to find a lead that may help them solve the case. Most of the issues are organized in a 12-jar file cabinet, some dating back to the 1970s. The statement emphasizes an irrefutable reality in missing person investigations. A break in the case can occur at any time and in any shape. In 2019, 3 women in Cleveland confirmed this when they fled their captor after a decade of captivity. People worldwide were interested in the story as they cheered for the discovery of Amanda Berry, Gina Desses, and Michelle Knight and sought to figure out how they stayed unnoticed for so long in the Cleveland mansion. Lowery said it could have been difficult for Carla's story to reach a national audience because of the circumstances of her abduction and the suspicion thrown at her parents during a phone conversation in early October. However, he said that getting media attention for the loss of a Hispanic youngster is much more difficult. Have you ever seen a face similar to Carla's? If yes, all you need to do is phone the Las Vegas FBI office or Metro murder investigators if you have any tips on Carla's abduction. Crime Stoppers may be reached for anonymous tips. According to FBI Supervisory Special Agent Alina Latarola, a $5,000 reward is available for anybody with information that leads to the case's closure. The next one is Tar Palumbo. A lady was spotted strolling about a restricted area of the Reno-Tahoe International Airport in Reno, Nevada. Shortly after midnight on April 26, 2000, when airport police began hunting for her, he discovered her hiding behind a vehicle. She introduced herself as Tar Palumbo and stated that she was looking for her younger sister, who was frantically running about the tarmac. He didn't think Star was telling the truth. According to the officer, she appeared to be hallucinating but did not constitute a threat. At 1:30 a.m., he dropped Star off at the neighboring Reno Hilton Hotel and Casino. Star was observed walking inside the hotel but did not check in. Palumbo was never seen or heard from after that. Star's automobile was discovered illegally parked at the airport the next day after she went missing. Her phone and pocketbook, which had $600, were both inside. 3 copies of emails she sent to the White House were also found. She feared the federal government was attempting to assassinate her. A sketch of a tight and gag lady meeting her description was also found inside the automobile. Furthermore, 2 books on how to alter one's identity were available. The image of Star was plastered over the state of Nevada. Detective Jenkins met with Linda Fields, a casino owner who claimed to have seen Star in her Alco, Nevada casino 8 months after she vanished. Star grew enraged, according to Linda, when she noticed a man staring at her through the bar window. Star spat away with another young lady. There haven't been any further sightings. The case of Star Palumbo's disappearance is still under investigation. What happened to her? Well, who is Star? Star, 25, was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, where she lived with her family. In 1999, however, she chose to live with her grandmother in Reno, Nevada. Her life had taken a turn once she moved to Reno. Nevertheless, she had been a happy lady with a promising future besides having a drug addiction, specifically methamphetamines. Her employment as a pawn shop clerk, according to her pals, did not pay enough to maintain her addiction. As a result, officials suspect she turned to prostitution as her phone book had multiple phone numbers of males. Every week, Star and her mother Gail spoke on the phone. Gail noted that her daughter appeared nervous during the previous phone chat on April 25th. Star believed she was being followed and that her phone had been tapped. She feared for her safety and wanted to return to Arizona. Even though officials could never authenticate the encounter, the lady said she met her daughter Star in December 2000. 8 months after she vanished, Linda Fields was the owner of the Silver Dollar Casino in Alco, Nevada, which is roughly 4 hours south of Reno. She said she grew agitated when the man glanced through a window and left with another young woman. What happened to Star is the subject of a few hypotheses. She might have had a drug-induced psychosis or an undetected mental ailment. It's conceivable that she's forgotten who she is and where she came from. However, the possibility of foul play has not been ruled out. Star probably crossed paths with the wrong person because of her drug and prostitution history. Star died of an overdose and her corpse was thrown in the desert. It has also been alleged that sex trafficking was taking place in the area. Her mother, on the other hand, feels she is still alive. Star's acquaintances informed the police that she was attempting to conceal her valid name to avoid paying drug debts to people she owed money. Once upon a time, Star Palumbo was full of hope and promise. However, officials think she became involved in a deadly and addictive narcotics world that jeopardized her life. In summary, Detective Jenkins feels it was Star and her life that took a sad turn. Star worked as a pawn shop cashier, but her drug habit, according to her acquaintances, cost her more than she earned. According to Detective Jenkins, Star began looking for other methods to generate money. Star, in her mother's view, wanted to change her life. She mentioned returning to Tucson and beginning afresh. On the other hand, Gail Palumbo has not heard from her daughter since that phone conversation. The search for Star's mother began immediately. It's unclear if Star was able to change her identity or went into hiding. It's also unclear whether the people she owes money to are suspects. In reality, have you ever come across such instances around you? Although, of course, not every case remains a cold case. But if a case remains to be a cold case, it might have mysterious happenings. What do you all think about these cold cases? Are they both still alive? Will some special agents or detectives open these mysteries and solve them? Do these cases need to be solved? Or will they continue to be unsolved? Sometimes gods have got their answers. Years are passing, but let us wait and watch. He bound her, beat her, orally raped her, and likely shot her child to death in front of her before killing her. She had been beaten to death with a fireplace poker, a conch shell, and a cast iron kettle. Her purse was emptied out on the floor and an undetermined amount of cash was stolen. She was taken from her bed while her family was asleep. If you're not safe at home, where are you going to be safe? This is the story of 23-year-old Stacy Falcon Dewey and her 3-year-old son, Jacob Dewey, from Renton, Washington. The U.S. authorities charged a man in their deaths after more than 27 years. Stacy and Jacob were killed in a Seattle suburb. This case became the subject of a 2019 Seattle Times series, In the Dark, which detailed how, despite seeming to be solved, it instead was neglected for years. All the while, Vian Falcon, the mother and grandmother of the victims, was never informed of the DNA link found to a suspect. Falcon Dewey had left her son Jake with a babysitter on the night of October 27, 1994, when she left for a belated celebration of her birthday. She went to the Kenton Ridge apartments to pick up her son sometime between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. the next day. Though they left the babysitter's home all right, she and Jake never arrived at her apartment a short distance away. Around 3:30 a.m. that day, a Seattle Times newspaper carrier called 911 to report discovering a body lying in the road on 55th Street in Renton, a dead-end road 3 miles from the babysitter's apartment complex. It was Falcon Dewey, and lying on top of her was her young son, Jacob. When the officers arrived, they found the pair lying in the middle of the roadway next to the mother's car, both shot in the head. Falcon Dewey also had gunshot wounds to her arm and shoulder, one of which authorities determined struck her after it went through her son's small body. In addition, Dewey had blunt force trauma to her head, bruising, and linear abrasions to her neck. Police said there was a struggle at the scene. Evidence collected and documented from the scene suggested that a struggle occurred both inside and outside of the vehicle, and that the killer may have been looking for something. For instance, some of the contents of Dewey's purse were strewn about the vehicle, including her wallet. The keys to the car appeared to have been dropped between the driver's seat and the door and were not readily visible. In the Buick, there were circular sections of brown packing tape that indicated they had been used as binding for Falcon Dewey's hands and feet. Dewey's belt was unbuckled and buttons had been ripped from her shirt. Vian Falcon, Miss Falcon Dewey's mother, told CNN that she was emotionally devastated by the loss of her daughter and grandson. "I couldn't believe it, and I went running down the street like a wild woman until I found a place where I could just collapse and cry," said Vian Falcon, referring to the day police told her about the killings. Were taken from Falcon Dewey's body at autopsy. In 2001, they were tested for DNA, which indicated the presence of semen in the victim's throat and on her hand at the time of her death. Subsequently, in 2002, an initial connection was made to the suspect with the help of DNA evidence. The suspect was 51-year-old Jerome Frank Jones. Authorities learned after the 2002 DNA match that Jones was already behind bars in connection with Hebden, California slaying. Immediately flew south and visited Jones at the Salinas Valley State Prison. In an interview with a suspect in California, Jones confirmed that he lived near Renton from 1994 to 1995, but he denied ever meeting or knowing Miss Falcon Dewey. When shown a picture of Stacy Falcon, Jones said that he did not know her. He was asked this question several times, and he said he was positive that he had never met her and did not know her. The manager of the Kenton Ridge Apartments confirmed that Jones had lived there from 1993 to 1994. The records also showed that Falcon Dewey lived at the same complex in 1994, moving elsewhere just months before she was murdered. However, detectives could not find a link other than the DNA results. None of her friends recognized Jones. He was also not seen with her on the night of her birthday celebration. The clerk at a convenience store Dewey visited around 1:20 a.m. on the morning of the murders reported seeing her with an unidentified white man, and to the contrary, Jones is black. In addition, no one who saw Dewey leave the babysitter's home with her son saw Jones or anyone else with her at that time. These reasons were enough for the police to stop going after Jones in connection to this murder. Over the subsequent years, additional evidence was submitted for DNA testing, witnesses were questioned, and the hunt for more evidence carried on. But when the authorities were unable to find any significant leads, the case eventually went cold. A number of other pieces of physical evidence were recently submitted to the crime lab for additional testing, and a significant advancement was made in December 2021. The cold case detectives learned that semen had been found on the sleeve of Jake Dewey's jacket, and the DNA matched with that of Jones. A subsequent DNA sample taken from Jones in prison confirmed the match. It was 5 months after Falcon Dewey and Jake were slain that Jones and an accomplice shot and killed Hebden more than 1,000 miles away in Irvine. Following the shooting, he fled back to Seattle, where he was arrested on a first-degree murder charge. While in the King County Jail, he assaulted a corrections officer for which he was convicted in 1996. The judge sentenced him well above the standard range in that case. The sentencing court found that the defendant committed this assault with deliberate cruelty, delivering multiple gratuitous blows to the victim even after the officer had fallen to the floor. Sentencing paperwork in the Hebden case indicated that Jones also had a previous conviction for shooting a victim in the back during a 1987 robbery. While in prison, he had been convicted of additional felony assaults as well as felony possession of a weapon. Prosecutors went on to state that Jones clearly presents a substantial likelihood of danger to the entire community. Once he is extradited to King County, Jones is arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Jones will be held on without bail pending trial in the double murder of Falcon Dewey and her son. Jerome Frank Jones has been charged with aggravated murder in the deaths of Stacy Falcon Dewey and her 3-year-old son, Jacob Dewey. If convicted as charged, Jones would serve a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole on top of the decades-long sentence he's already serving. This is the story of 4-year-old Jessica Gutierrez from Lexington, South Carolina, who was kidnapped from her own bed early in the morning while her family slept and was later found to be dead 35 years ago. And the question which remained all throughout was, where was the girl's body? Who was the man with the magic hat? Jessica was sleeping in the bedroom with her 2 sisters and her family's Lexington mobile home during the evening hours of June 5, 1986. An unknown intruder or intruders entered the house sometime between 11:30 p.m. and 9 a.m. on June 6, the following morning. The intruder apparently broke in through the living room window and removed the screens and curtains. The abductor then picked up Jessica from the bedroom and left the residence through the front door. Jessica's mother discovered the crime scene and her disappearance on the morning of June 6. Her 6-year-old sister Rebecca stated that Jessica had been taken by the man with the magic hat and the beard. Jessica was never heard from again. Rebecca, now an adult, remembered seeing a man lift Jessica out of the bed and carry her away. She stated the man was able to do this without waking Jessica. Rebecca had been too frightened by what she saw to tell anyone until the next morning when Jessica was discovered missing. Just a few days before Jessica disappeared, her mother Deborah had broken up with her boyfriend and kicked him out of the house for alcohol use and what she described as possessive behavior. Was Deborah's ex-boyfriend the man with the magic hat and the beard? Did he abduct Jessica out of revenge, possessiveness, or jealousy? A lot of such questions arose instantly as the police heard Deborah's story. During the initial investigation, Deborah accused her ex-boyfriend of abducting Jessica, but he said he had no idea where she was. The man was questioned repeatedly by police, but he was never charged. Jessica's father was ruled out as a suspect in the case, as he had been living in California at the time of her abduction. Investigators worked for decades without success in tracking down a suspect, and eventually the case remained cold for a couple of decades. Despite a massive search, neither Jessica nor her killer were ever found. The case was then reviewed in 2008 and 2015. Lexington County Sheriff Jay Coons said investigators took a fresh look at the case this time. FBI special agents and analysts in the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team were brought in and helped review reports and interview more than 125 people. Because of the work we did coming together as a team, we were able to sort and connect more pieces of the puzzle about what happened to Jessica all those years ago. Sheriff Coons said a video featuring an emotional interview with Jessica's mother, Deborah, was also circulated when the case was reopened. Due to these intensive efforts by law enforcement and the media and the fingerprint found on the window of Jessica's bedroom, the authorities were finally able to name a prime suspect in the kidnapping of Jessica. The man's name was Thomas Eric McDowell, a friend of the family who was 27 in 1986 and had served time in a North Carolina prison for rape. His fingerprint was found on the window of Jessica's bedroom. It was the only fingerprint on the window. Deborah stated that she cleaned the windows every night. It turned out that in 1987, McDowell allegedly told a cellmate that he had kidnapped a girl in Lexington County and buried her body in a landfill there. He mentioned that he was wearing a tall cowboy hat at the time of the kidnapping. His cellmate told authorities about his statements, and when police confronted McDowell, he offered to confess if he got immunity from prosecution for the crime. The immunity was denied, and McDowell did not speak any further on the subject. In January 2022, McDowell was charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree burglary in Jessica's disappearance. Authorities haven't released much information about the evidence against him. They just revealed that McDowell lived in Lexington County in 1986 when Jessica disappeared. Deborah still believed her ex-boyfriend is somehow involved in the case. The ex-boyfriend and McDowell denied knowing each other, but Deborah says they met each other at a gathering several months before Jessica disappeared. Jessica's remains have never been found, but foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved. McDowell is being held on no bond at the Wake County Detention Center in Raleigh until he is extradited back to South Carolina. It is unclear if he has retained an attorney, but the question which was asked at the start remained unanswered. Where's Jessica's body? What do you guys think? Was Deborah's ex-boyfriend actually involved in the case? Is McDowell really the culprit, or was he framed by the man with the magic hat? Did his fingerprint come from himself, or was planted there by someone on the window? These 3-decade-long cold cases involve women of different age groups as the victims, which really makes us believe that women, no matter of any age bracket, have always been unsafe despite advancements in DNA technology or law enforcement agencies. These were not just crimes done for money or possessions. These were crimes against vulnerable women. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. When the people closest to you, who are supposed to look after your well-being and growth, become the reason for your frightful nightmares, who do you even trust in that case? It's often said that when a crime is too complicated, you must look into the simplest of details, which are most likely to be missed as the investigations begin. But when the detectives go back from where they started, some shocking discoveries often emerge. Such shocking crimes which will make you realize the fact that, which is the most complicated, is the simplest of all. This is the case of 25-year-old Janet Abrua, who was discovered dead in her North Carolina home, and her family suspected her husband's involvement. For the lack of direct evidence, the case goes cold for years, leaving Janet's family without closure and potentially putting another woman in danger. The question in the minds of authority was, where was her contact lenses? On April 26, 2005, Raven Abaroa, 28, reported to police that he had come home at 10 p.m. to find his wife, Janet Abaroa, dead. She's been shot by something. There's blood everywhere, he said on the 911 call. He had returned from a game of soccer that evening. As the police turned up to the scene, they saw Janet lying dead on the bed. She had stab wounds on her body, and her 6-month-old son was safe and unaware in the next room. Raven told the police that when he left, his wife was in bed watching TV. The couple, who were both raised in the Church of Latter-day Saint, had spent time together before the game with a friend. Janet's body was immediately sent for an autopsy, which revealed that she had been stabbed multiple times, not shot, and it showed that she was pregnant with Raven's second child. Janet was the 7th of 10 siblings. She grew up in a Mormon family. She met Raven Abaroa, who was also a Mormon, in 1998 at Southern Virginia University, where she played soccer as well. He was a fellow soccer player who instantly swept her off her feet. In August 2000, after 2 years together, Janet and Raven Abaroa married at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C. They settled in southeastern Virginia. Her friends and family thought that life for the newlywed couple was perfect. Shortly after his wife's death, Raven Abaroa moved to Salt Lake City, Utah with their son. With a prime suspicion on the husband Raven Abaroa, the police began investigating the case in search of Janet's killer. There were a lot of reasons for police to suspect Abaroa of killing his wife, including a $500,000 life insurance policy and a suspiciously missing knife collection. But Raven also seemed to have an airtight alibi. A friend of his testified in support of Raven's claim of being at the soccer game. For 5 years, Abaroa evaded arrest on the basis of that alibi. In 2008, he remarried Vanessa Pond in Salt Lake City. Vanessa was a single mother whose daughter was in the same daycare program as Abaroa's son, Caden. She found Raven upfront, honest, and genuine, and admired the fact that he was a single father looking after his kids single-handedly. Soon, they decided to move in together. It was soon enough when Vanessa found out that she had been wrong with her opinion about Raven. She started seeing abrupt changes in the behavior of her new husband. As Vanessa got to know about his wife's death, she went online to find out more about the death of Janet Abrua. He had his stories about how people were trying to frame him, about how horrible the cops were, and how he continued to try to contact the police to find out what's going on, stated Vanessa. 3 years after Janet Abrua's death was still unsolved, Vanessa and Raven Abrua were married in the backyard of her parents' home. When Janet Abrua's sisters learned he was engaged, they said they felt they had to reach out to his new fiancée. We just wanted her to make sure she was aware of the things that had been in the news about him. That she would know what she was getting into because we were fearful for her, said Janet's sister, Dana Kendall. Not long after this, Pond said Raven Abaroa began acting in ways she didn't understand. She said that he would switch within moments and would utter the most horrible things, but the very next moment he would apologize. Vanessa Pond claimed that the outburst had become very physical. He grabbed me from the door and threw me up against the wall, and when I fell, he tried to convince me that I had tripped, said Vanessa. At this point in the story enters a new detective and a question of a missing contact lens, and these entries would give it a breakthrough twist. Just 4 months into Vanessa and Raven's marriage, Vanessa claimed that she feared for her safety. The couple separated and the marriage was annulled. Vanessa went public in spring 2009 with her fears that he killed his first wife. The Durham police assigned a new detective to Janet Abaroa's case, Detective Sowell. Sowell believed that Raven never kept his lies straight and that his initial statements to law enforcement were contradictory. Then, as he was reviewing the crime scene photos, Sowell noticed something that stuck out to him as odd. He saw the contact lens case on the counter with the top off of it, indicating that the contacts were probably not in there, which would be contrary to her going to bed as Raven claimed her to. This detail caught the eye of the detective because from the interviews of Janet Abreu's family and friends, he knew that Janet was consistent with removing her contacts before going to sleep. The detective said that he found this detail suspicious enough to go after Raven. For Saul, another evidence that hinted towards Raven's guilt was the fact that there was the absence of any disturbance based on the manner of her death, because a stabbing is not immediate and it's usually violent with struggle and disturbance. The detective managed to grab an arrest warrant for Raven, and he was arrested on February 1, 2010. He was charged with first-degree murder in the death of his first wife. In July 2010, Janet Abaroa's body was exhumed and authorities determined that she had been wearing contacts when she was buried. Apparently, this evidence was crucial in determining a flaw in Raven Abaroa's story. It was not long after this when Raven Abaroa went on trial and faced his second wife in court. During his trial, which began in 2013, prosecutors presented Raven Abaroa as a controlling husband. Vanessa, who testified as a witness for the prosecution, detailed how she saw Raven Abaroa become violent on the soccer field, and how his aggression turned on her. When he sees weakness, he just comes at you harder and harder, Vanessa said in court. On the other hand, Raven's defense team argued that the prosecution's evidence against their client was mostly circumstantial and police had ignored evidence, including a bloody shoe print that they said could have pointed to a different killer. In May 2013, the jury failed to reach a verdict, deadlocking 11-1 on a guilty verdict, and the judge declared a mistrial. Before even Abaroa's second trial was supposed to begin in March 2014, he entered an Alford plea for voluntary manslaughter, acknowledging that there was evidence to convict him, but not admitting guilt. A judge sentenced him to between 95 and 123 months in jail, but he was granted credit for the 4 years he had spent behind bars before and during his trial, which was applied as time served. Raven Abaroa did not testify at his trial, but he spoke in court in 2014 after being sentenced. I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I did not do. I take this plea to ensure that doesn't happen. And that's the only reason. I didn't kill my wife, said Raven Abaroa. He was 39 when he was released from prison on Christmas Day in 2017. He now lives in Utah while his second wife continues to go out in public cautioning them about Raven. Vanessa said that her advice for other women who might meet Abaroa is to stay away from him. I was shocked. But more than that, I was shocked at what the plea deal turned out to be. That's not justice at all. It's not justice, said Vanessa in a public interview. What do you guys think? Is Vanessa right on her claims about justice not being served? Was this really one of those where the law is manipulated to serve the culprit's purpose and the victim is left unjustified? Did Raven actually kill his wife? Also, what about those contact lenses? Were they real? Let us know in the comments. This is the story of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, two best friends from a small town called Cambridgeshire, who went missing while they were out to buy sweets from a vending machine. And as the killer was revealed, the case of 10-year-old shocked the whole Britain nation because the abductor was found out to be one of the closest people to the best friends. On the evening of Sunday, August 4th, 2002, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman went out to buy sweets in Soham, Cambridgeshire. That morning, Jessica left her home to attend a barbecue at Holly's house. Holly, Jessica, and a third friend named Natalie Parr played computer games and listened to music until Natalie left. The girls changed into matching Manchester United football kits in the afternoon, and Holly's mother took the last picture of them. At 6:15, they left the house without telling anyone to buy sweets from a vending machine at the local sports center. But the 10-year-olds never made it back home. At 8 p.m., Holly's mother noticed that despite being told to stay in the house, the kids had sneaked out of the house. She waited for them to be back home as soon as the vending machine wasn't far from the house. But the children didn't return and it got dark. She and a few of her friends went out in search of them. But to their disappointment, they couldn't find the kids in the neighborhood. Holly's mother reported the two friends missing at 9:55 p.m. Back then, they didn't know that the search for the kids would lead them to the worst-case scenario. The police started a massive search for the girls, and 400 police officers and hundreds of volunteers looked for them in Operation Fincham. They conducted house-to-house inquiries, and even the United States Air Force personnel stationed at nearby air bases helped in the search. As both girls were taught to be wary of strangers, the police thought that the kidnapper must be someone the Wells and Chapman family were acquainted with. On August 17, 2002, almost 2 weeks after the girls went missing, Keith Pryor, a gamekeeper in an irrigation ditch, discovered the girls' bodies in the ditch near the perimeter fence of RAF Lakenheath and Suffolk, about 10 miles east of Soham. Their bodies were found in an advanced state of decomposition as the killers had attempted to burn them. They were later identified correctly as Holly and Jessica by DNA testing. The authorities immediately began an investigation to catch their killer, and in their prime suspicion was their school caretaker, Ian Huntley. After the girls' disappearance, Huntley, then 28 years of age, was among those to make media appeals for their safe return. He even told journalists that he was one of the last people to see them alive. The police began to get suspicious of Huntley after an officer searched his home on August 5th. The officer noted that it had been thoroughly cleaned and clothing was on the washing line, despite it having rained during the past couple of days. An eyewitness also said that he saw Huntley and Carr, his girlfriend who worked as an assistant in the same school as him, peering into the boot of their car looking distressed, and that Carr had been weeping. In addition to this, Huntley had even asked a police officer about how long the DNA lasted. On August 16, 2002, a day before the girls' bodies were found, Huntley and Carr were questioned by the police. They were interrogated separately for approximately 7 hours. By that time, locals from his hometown of Grimsby had recognized him in the televised appearances as being linked to a sex attack on a woman. It later emerged that before moving to Cambridgeshire, he had previously been investigated for rape and sexual assault with underage girls. Away with lying for a long time and got away with being abusive for a long time, claimed the authorities. Jessica's mobile phone signal was last registered to a mast outside Huntley's house. Carr slipped up in the detail of the false alibi to police. She had actually been with her mother in Grimsby at the time of the girls' disappearance, and the girls' clothes were found partially burned and dumped in a bin at the school where the bin had his fingerprints on it as well. It also emerged that Huntley's car had been cleaned and all 4 tires were replaced the day after the murder. Huntley had also paid the mechanic to forge the date on the receipt to make it look like they were changed earlier. A forensic psychologist, Carrie Danes, claimed that Huntley had been planning this attack for some time. The authorities believed that Huntley was confident about not getting caught for his deeds. I think people who get away with that kind of behavior believe that they won't be caught. So they have a certain level of confidence when they tell their lies, stated one of the officials. Huntley and Carr were first questioned by the police and then later arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder. On December 17, 2003, Huntley was found guilty on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. He is serving his sentence at HMP Franklin Prison in County Durham. Carr was charged with perverting the course of justice on August 21, 2002. On January 16, 2003, she was charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender. She pleaded guilty to the first charge and not guilty to the second. She was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison and was released on probation on May 14, 2004 after serving 21 months, which was half her sentence. She won an injunction on February 24, 2005, granting her lifelong anonymity on the grounds that her life would otherwise be in danger. In 2011, Carr gave birth to her first child with her new husband. The anonymity order extends to include the child so that he or she should never know their mother's previous identity. Savannah Gold's parents, Sharon and Daniel, received such unusual text messages from their daughter, and the more unusual thing was that the texts were riddled with spelling mistakes. Straight away, they became very suspicious and terrified of Savannah's safety. They knew Savannah hadn't sent the messages. They were badly written and had a completely different structure and tone to the words she usually used. By whom were these texts sent? Who was trying to pose as Savannah and deceive her parents? Was it her so-called new lover or someone else? She wasn't answering her phone and she wasn't on social media. This is the story of Savannah Gold, and as her name suggests, she was someone known to have a heart of gold. She loved art, lacrosse, dancing, sewing, and animals. Savannah chose to see the good in people. Maybe that turned out to be one of the reasons for her death, as she failed to see the evil in the world and in the people. In fact, the evil was constantly around her, in the form of her coworker. As her father watched a video of Savannah struggling for her life, the car shaking violently back and forth, he said he saw her lion heart and glowing colors for the last time. The 21-year-old left for a shift at a restaurant and never came home. Let us dive straight into beautiful and courageous Savannah Gold's story. The parents of Savannah Gold could not have been prouder of their daughter. At high school, sporty Savannah had played lacrosse, loved dancing, and inspired everyone with her positivity and motivation. She also had a creative side and had excelled at art school. Friends called Savannah an animal lover, naturally kind and compassionate. On August 2, 2017, dressed in her work uniform, 21-year-old Savannah Gold left her Jacksonville, Florida, family home for a 5:30 p.m. shift at the Bonefish Grill, a seafood restaurant where she had worked as a server for the past 2 years. An hour and a half later, Savannah's mother Sherry received a bizarre text from her phone. "Hey, I just wanted to tell you and Mom I met a really great guy and we are running away together. I love him and we are leaving tonight. I'll call you later when we get to where we are going." A few minutes later, Savannah's brother Chris received another text from her phone. "Hey, I quit. I'm leaving with my boyfriend. I can't do this shit anymore. I'm fine. Just want to get away." Savannah's parents knew the texts were in from their daughter the minute they read them. They were riddled with spelling errors, which was unlike Savannah. They called and texted her repeatedly, but there was no answer, and even her social media went dark. There was no way Savannah would leave for work as usual, then confess to running away with a man she didn't even name. It just didn't add up. They reported Savannah missing, and it didn't take long for authorities to find her car. It was sitting in the parking lot of the Bonefish Grill and wasn't locked. The front left tire was slashed, and Savannah's purse was found near the driver's seat. Her phone was missing, but her credit cards, cash, and identification were still there, which ruled out the possibility of a robbery. Her loved ones put together a missing persons poster and started handing out copies around the area, pleading for information. Investigators interviewed Savannah's co-workers, including the chef and manager of the Bonefish Grill, 28-year-old Lee Rodarte. He claimed he hadn't seen her all that day. Lee appeared to be genuinely distraught over Savannah's disappearance and helped her family search for her, even putting up missing flyers at the restaurant. Fortunately for detectives, a surveillance camera covered the entire parking lot of the Bonefish Grill, and when they took a look, they were stunned with what they found. Savannah's entire kidnapping was caught on tape, and what the tape revealed was the bravery and courage of Savannah Gold. At 5:31 p.m., Savannah pulled into the parking lot of the Bonefish Grill and parked. Seconds later, a silver Chevy Malibu pulled up next to her. Savannah walked over to the car and spoke with the driver through the window for 14 minutes. She then got into the back seat, and that was when things took a dark turn. The car began to jerk violently back and forth. The left passenger's side door swung open 3 separate times as if someone was trying to escape. Each time, it was quickly closed shut. After 90 seconds, the car stopped moving. Suddenly, the driver of the Chevy Malibu got out and walked over to Savannah's car. He opened the driver's side door, leaned in, and took an unknown object. He then slashed one of Savannah's tires, got back into the Chevy Malibu, and sped off at 6.04 with Savannah still inside. It was clear a struggle had ensued between Savannah and the mystery driver. What detectives didn't know was who and why. With the use of the CCTV footage, investigators quickly discovered the owner of the Chevy Malibu was none other than Lee Rodarte, the same person who said he hadn't seen Savannah at all on the day she vanished. On August 5th, detectives went to the Bonefish Grill and took Lee in for a second interview mid-shift. When asked to remove his chef's jacket, detectives noticed a cut on his neck. Lee described it as self-inflicted. Partway into the interrogation, Lee admitted that not only was he with Savannah on August 2nd, the day she disappeared, but that she was more than just his co-worker. Despite having a long-term girlfriend of 12 years named Chelsea, Lee was also sleeping with Savannah on the side for 8 months. According to Lee, he ended things with Savannah shortly before her disappearance. She became upset and retaliated by telling all of their co-workers about the relationship, and it had gotten back to Chelsea. It was also against the company policy for Lee and Savannah to have an intimate relationship because he was a superior. Lee feared losing both his job as well as Chelsea. I told her that servers at Bonefish were coming to me and telling me that you're telling people when you're out that we're having sex and we're boyfriend and girlfriend, and I said I would appreciate I need you to stop. Because for one thing, this is jeopardizing my job. We agreed to, split. Stop talking mutually and just move on and, be cordial or whatever. And she said, I'm going to do what I want. You can believe what you want. I didn't tell anybody anything. And I told her, the girl that you were out with told Chelsea that we're still having sex and that you were just at my house like yesterday, hanging out. I said, stop, I'm serious. I don't want to talk to you. It's not good for us, so let's stop. And she just said, why did you do that? I said, well, I'm upset. And she said, fuck you. You are a piece of shit. She said she was going to keep talking, telling lies and stuff about me and everything like that. Following the argument, Lee said Savannah was picked up by someone in the green Ford and he never saw her again. Oddly, Lee continued to repeat that Savannah had her phone in her hand when she left. Of course, cameras don't lie, and detectives knew Savannah had never left Lee's vehicle, at least not in the parking lot of the Bonefish Grill. They also had a hunch the mysterious object Lee had taken from Savannah's car was her phone, which he then used to text her family pretending to be her. At first, Lee stuck to his story. He insisted he didn't know where Savannah was and that he never drove off with her. But when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. Lee admitted to killing Savannah but claimed it was in self-defense. Lee Ruderty finally confessed. He said he'd told multiple stories as he was afraid to tell the truth. He'd met Savannah when she'd arrived at work and they'd got into an argument. He said he'd killed Savannah in his car, but it had been an accident. He led the police to a nearby lake where divers recovered her body on August 5th. The autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but it was described as a violent murder. Savannah had been found and she had burns at 75% of her body, where her remains had been satellite. At Rodarte's home, crime scene investigators found knives, petrol, and bleach, as well as a fire pit. Despite his confession, Lee Rodarte pleaded not guilty in the case, and there started a long roller coaster ride to fight for justice for Savannah Gold. Lee's interrogations, questionings, his statements, and his answers told a different story every other time. This trial and fight for justice turned out to be worth looking at from a detailed vision. The authorities had a victim and the most probable killer, but the task was to get the suspect towards a successful sentencing. Rodarte was charged with second-degree murder and other charges, including tampering with evidence and abuse of a dead body. Savannah's mom, Sharon, expressed her complete devastation on social media. "My heart has burst. My baby girl is gone." She wrote, Bonefish Grill, where Savannah worked, was closed to show the staff's condolences for their colleague who had brought joy and happiness to work every day. A makeshift memorial grew with flowers and tributes to Savannah as people were left shocked by the killing of an innocent young woman. In 2019, Lee's lawyers filed a stand your ground law, a motion that is used when you believe you have harmed someone while defending yourself in fear of your own safety. The claim was an attempt to have the case dismissed. Rodarte said that Savannah had asked to talk and that she had taken heroin and was feeling paranoid. So she got in the car, although there were no drugs found in Savannah's system. Rodarte said he'd confronted Savannah about telling people at work that they were dating. He claimed she had said she could say whatever she wanted to. Rodarte said he tried to punch Savannah out of the car and then they grappled. He alleged that she had struck him and he had fought back. He had grabbed her neck in an attempt to get her to break her hold. He said then he had hurt and felt a sudden pop. The claim that he'd acted in fear of his life was rejected by the court. Rodarte was then offered a plea deal in return for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. He would receive a 40-year sentence. He accepted the deal and the other charges were dropped. It turns out murder runs in the family of Lee Rodarte. Lee's sister Amber Camarillo was sentenced to 2 years in prison in 2018 for the murder of Raquel Wallace at a Super 8 motel over an argument about a car. In March 2021, Rodarte, now 32, was officially sentenced, and Savannah's family shared their grief through their impact statements. Savannah's parents both wore a butterfly in honor of their daughter. She had a full life ahead of her, full of opportunity, and she did not get to experience the most beautiful parts. Her mom, Sharon, said, "Dad Daniel said his daughter could have changed countless lives if she had been given the chance to live." And he spoke of his agony over her final moments. As I watched the video of Savannah struggling for her life, Rodarte's car shaking back and forth, I saw her lion heart and glowing colors for the last time. Her dad Daniel said Lee called Chelsea from jail and said he couldn't talk about the case, but that he felt remorse. Now that Rodarte is behind bars, the Gold family is finally beginning to heal from the tragedy. To our family, extended family, and community, our hearts have begun to heal because of your love and support. Daniel Gold said in a statement to Action News Jacksonville after the sentence, saying, "Despite knowing who the killer was, no one ever knew what actually happened in the car. What was the overall motive? And was Savannah actually being as stubborn as Lee accused her of being?" As Rodarte bowed his head and didn't make a statement while he was being sentenced, we will never know what happened and why it actually happened. What do you guys think? Can you rightly guess what happened inside that car and why he killed such an innocent, beautiful, and compassionate girl? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Most criminals keep their misdeeds hidden, but the Zodiac Killer, as he called himself, was different from such criminals. He terrorized San Francisco with his murder spree from 1968 to 1969, teasing the cops with coded messages to the local newspaper. Although he claimed to have killed 37 people, he was directly linked to at least 5 murders. I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill someone gives me the most thrilling experience, claimed the Zodiac Killer in one of his letters. San Francisco's Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous and most elusive serial killers of all time. He actually gave himself the title Zodiac in the cryptic letters he sent to the press during his murder spree. The letter often began with, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and contained various cryptograms and taunts alluding to his planned murders. But who is the Zodiac Killer really? How did he murder his victims? And why is he so hard to catch? Can you even imagine what level of insanity this killer must be operating from? If you can't, let us in this video take you through the story of the Zodiac Killer. The story of the Zodiac Killer appears to have begun on the night of Friday, December 20th, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen, just 16 years old, headed out for her first date. She was with David Arthur Faraday, a 17-year-old who was a top student and a varsity wrestler. They ended up parked just off Lake Herman Road, also known as the Lover's Lane in Vallejo, California. Sometime between 11:10 and 11:15 p.m., they were attacked. The killer put his gun to the boy's head and pulled the trigger, killing him while he was still in the car. Betty exited the vehicle, but the killer shot her in the back 5 times as she tried to run away. Jen died of 5 gunshot wounds to her back at the scene, while Faraday died of a bullet wound to the head while he was being taken to the hospital. Minutes after midnight, as July 4th, 1969 turned into July 5th, the crimes continued with an attack on a man and woman at another Lover's Lane in Vallejo Blue Rock Springs golf course. This time, the man survived and offered a description of his attacker. There were also strange details surrounding the episode that may provide further clues as to the identity of the killer. The victims were Darlene Farron, age 22, and Michael McGough, age 19. Darlene was married to Dean Farron, her second husband, and had a baby girl. So her presence at a Lover's Lane with McGough required some explanation. Investigators learned that shortly before midnight, Darlene told her babysitters that she needed to buy fireworks for a party she was having that night. She asked the babysitters if they could stay until 12:15 a.m., so whatever she was up to, she didn't expect it to take long. Indeed, fireworks were readily available, sold at booths all over town. She picked up Michael McGough, who noticed that they were being followed when Darlene pulled away from his house. Darlene drove faster, and a chase ensued. The chase ended when Darlene hit a log at the golf course, causing her car to stall. Whoever was pursuing them parked behind and to the left of Darlene's car, but then quickly drove off again. Any sense of relief was temporary as the car returned 5 minutes later, parked the way it had before, and left the lights on. The driver shined a bright light in the faces of Darlene and Michael. The man got out of the car and approached them. The light went out. Michael thought it was a policeman. The two of them went for their wallets to get their IDs out. The man came to the passenger's side, shined his flashlight in Michael's face again, and then began shooting. He began hitting and shooting Michael, but did far more damage to Darlene, who was hit 9 times. When the shooter returned to his car, Michael got a good look at him. But he also saw the man returning. The man fired another 2 shots at each of the victims. The golf course caretaker heard the gunshots around midnight, but the police didn't take his report seriously, thinking he heard only 4th of July firecrackers. 3 teenagers found the victim soon thereafter. When one of the teens called the police to report the shooting, the police realized they had made a serious mistake in not responding to the previous call as quickly as possible. They arrived too late to catch the killer, but they were in time to save Michael's life. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason behind the killings, which made them all scarier. It seemed that the killer may have held a grudge against couples or lovers' points in particular. Investigators learned that Darlene went on dates with quite a few men, including policemen from the sheriff's office, despite being married. Thus, jealousy issues may have produced a long list of suspects. But a phone call made things more complex. The call was received by the Vallejo Police Department's switchboard at 12:40 a.m., just 2 minutes after Darlene was declared dead. The call consisted of a man saying, "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." In September 1969, the Zodiac changed up his modus operandi. He once again targeted a young college-age couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, who were simply enjoying a picnic at Lake Berryessa. However, instead of simply shooting them, he made Cecilia tie up Brian before tying her up. Then he drew a knife and stabbed them both repeatedly. Miraculously, Brian managed to survive, despite 8 stab wounds to the back. The final confirmed Zodiac victim was a taxi driver named Paul Stein, who was shot in the head by a passenger. 3 days after Paul Stein's murder, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac claiming responsibility for the crime. At the end of the letter, the killer suggested he was going to shoot out a tire of a school bus and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. 2 of the Zodiac's victims managed to survive, giving the police plenty of evidence to go on. Plus, the Zodiac didn't exactly hide from the spotlight. He sent at least 18 letters to both newspapers and private citizens during his murder spree. Despite the amount of available evidence, the police had no luck in discovering the killer's identity during the initial investigation. On July 31, 1969, the next communication from the killer came in the form of a letter sent to 3 area newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. In the letters, in order to prove them genuine, the killer revealed information that only he and the police knew. The latter stated the details of the murders which were unknown to the public. Details such as the brand name of the ammo used, number of shots fired, the position in which his victims were found dead, ornaments his victims wore, and what body parts he shot them. In the letters, the killer asked the editorials to print his ciphers on the front page of the respective papers. He also warned that if his ciphers were not printed by Friday, 1st of August, 1969, he would go on a killing rampage. He said he will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night and then move on to kill again until he ends up killing a dozen people over the weekend. In lieu of a signature, the killer drew a symbol. Investigators, both professional and amateur, have found a great many interpretations of what the symbol represents. What does it make you guys think of? The other newspapers received similar letters. Each of the 3 letters was accompanied by a distinct cipher. On August 7, 1969, the killer sent the next preceding letters, which were 3 pages long. It was the first time in which he referred to himself as the Zodiac. The letters began with the infamous introduction. "This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me," said the Zodiac, beginning the contents of his letter. Little did he know that the police had already cracked the code, but were still unable to get hold of the Zodiac killer. "Dick, you can't hold this against them. But the real concern that I have is that he doesn't do this again. I would like to see some people save this experience." In the letter, he gave further details about his killing of the couple on July 4, 1969. He said that he did not open the car door. The window was rolled down already. He missed his first shot at the man sitting in the car. The man ended up on the back seat, then the floor in the back, thrashing out very violently with his legs. That's how he shot him in the knee. He claimed that later he drove away slowly so as not to draw attention to his car. He also let his disappointment out and claimed that he was not happy to see that he did not get front page coverage the last time he had sent letters. The Zodiac killer had expected that he would continue this game of chase and run with the police cleverly and that his ciphers would not ever be deciphered. Maybe the Zodiac had this notion that he was too smart and intelligent for the law enforcement, or in fact, this whole human race. The cipher texts were made available to the NSA, CIA, and FBI, but it was a pair of amateurs who saw ciphers in a newspaper article and cracked them. Donald Hardin, a high school history and economics teacher, began working on the ciphers and was later joined by his wife, Betty Hardin, who had no previous experience with cryptology. If you think you are smarter than the Zodiac Killer, you might want to pause the video here and try to decipher the code. But be warned that this is difficult, but if you are clever enough, you might be able to beat the husband and wife decipherment of 20 hours. The Hardins' work was complicated, but with the presence of some minor errors, they were able to decipher one of his other letters, which shocked the law enforcement and made them rethink their experience in dealing with insanity. I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's more fun than killing a wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife," said the Zodiac Killer's letter. The Zodiac Killer continued to kill and leave police with frustrating evidence, coded messages, anonymous phone calls, the cross circles scribbled on victims' automobiles, sending over blood-stained clothing, and testimonies from survivors. But it appeared to be one of the toughest tasks to catch him. There are more Zodiac communications that were deemed to be genuine, 1974. It's worth noting that a long gap between letters suggested that the killer may have been in custody for lesser charges. Nothing was received from the killer between his letters of March 22, 1971 and January 29, 1974. The killer claimed in one of his letters that he had gone ahead and killed a total of 37 people, but the authorities believed it was pure fiction. None of the letters provided any evidence of Zodiac killing anyone after Stein. Some of the victims he claimed were really killed, but he failed to provide any evidence that he had anything to do with the murders. He had no knowledge of these killings that couldn't be found in newspaper accounts. In March 2004, the police marked the case as inactive, then reopened it again in 2008, but to no avail. Inspired by the success of the DNA investigation in the decades-old Golden State Killer case, the police renewed their investigation efforts at the end of 2018. They said that DNA technology has finally evolved enough to give the police and the victims' families new hope. Further, they added that there's a chance something could be extracted from the DNA samples, which were not considered viable before. For example, the flaps of envelopes or stamps that might have been licked by the Zodiac Killer. Despite hope aroused by the DNA advancements, the Zodiac Killer has managed to evade the authorities to this day. Decades have passed since his murder spree and the case still has thousands of potential aspects. All police departments have limited resources, both in terms of manpower and money that can be allocated to forensic research. Plus, the somewhat careless way in which genetic materials were handled before the evolution of DNA technology does not help the investigators move forward. However, the Zodiac enthusiasts remain convinced that the killer is not only alive, but that he can still be brought to justice. Are they right? Only time will tell. The Zodiac Killer may be one of the scariest murderers in San Francisco's history, but he's far from the only one. Crime writer Robert Gray Smith argued that the Zodiac Killer remained active through the 1980s and murdered dozens more people, though his view remained controversial. During the 1990s, several investigators claimed to have identified the Zodiac Killer. The suspect most often cited was Arthur Leigh Allen, a Vallejo, California school teacher who had been institutionalized in 1975 for child molestation, though his identification with the Zodiac Killer has never been confirmed or proved. What do you guys think? The art and science that is cryptanalysis are constantly improving and computers are becoming ever more powerful. Do you guys expect the unsolved Zodiac ciphers to reveal the killer's identity? Or perhaps their eventual solutions will provide one extra clue that helps unravel the case? Do you guys think that this case, which shook law enforcement and highly influenced pop culture, will ever come to its resolution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. They all drank each other's blood. They didn't drink the blood of the victims. The murder victims, but yes, they did this ritual thing where they drank each other's blood. They said it made them feel and have senses of the feelings they hadn't felt before. It was crazy. This was the statement voiced by a veteran reporter, Frank Stanfield. He was one of the large numbers of reporters who covered this unreal and unbelievable vampire cult murder story which shook not just America, but the whole world. This case made international news. There were German TV crews, all the local media, and the court TV covering the trial and events of this horrific case. A special press room was set up for everybody to be able to cover the trial. It was really kind of a three-ring circus. But what is this vampire cult leader story? Who is Rod Ferrell? What were the vampire murders? How did Ferrell's case shake out in court? Did they really drink human blood? And were they actual vampires? Answers to all these questions lie inside the events of this blood-curdling gothic story which inspired the veteran reporter Frank to write a book on it called The Mind of a Vampire. And this is not fiction. The story contains details from the case that some might find disturbing. With that warning, let's dive right into this bizarre crime from Central Florida. Rod Ferrell was a 16-year-old boy from Murray, Kentucky, whose delusions led him to lead a ritualistic cult and brutally murder a 14-year-old member's parents in their home. He became the youngest to be on death row until his sentence was reduced to life prison with no parole. But to understand this story and make some sense of it, you need to know the events in the history from where he wasn't even born. And to convince yourself that this story is real, you need to follow Rod's life from his early childhood. Roderick did not have an easy life growing up. He was born to his then 16-year-old mom, Sandra Gibson, on March 28, 1980 in Murray. His father abandoned him to serve in the military and was never a part of his life. His maternal grandfather allegedly sexually abused him when he was around 5 years old. However, no criminal charges against the grandfather were ever pursued. Sandra and Rod did not have a stable home life, bouncing back and forth between living with Sandra's parents and public housing. Sandra worked as an exotic dancer and sex worker to make ends meet. She introduced Rod to vampires and the macabre from a young age. They bonded over Dracula films and Vampire, the Masquerade comic books. Sandra was far from an ideal mother and had a questionable and complex relationship with her son. At the age of 34, she was even caught writing disturbing love letters to a 14-year-old boy. "I long to be near you for your embrace. Yes, to become a vampire, a part of the family. Immortal and truly yours forever. I only hope that one day you will once again return to Murray. You will then come for me and cross me over, and I will be your bride for eternity and you my sire," wrote Sandra Gibson in the letter. The rest of the vampire clan's members came from equally depressing and disturbing situations. The most notable members were Scott Anderson, Rod's right-hand man, Chastity Kessie, his then 16-year-old girlfriend, Dana Cooper, a friend for the ride, and Heather Windorf, Rod's damsel in distress and who also turned out to be the victim ahead in the story. All of them took comfort in being able to belong to a group of outsiders and like-minded people while growing up in a place that is generally unaccepting of anything non-traditional. The gang's meet-up spot was called the Vampire Hotel. It was a dilapidated structure in the middle of the woods near Kentucky Lake, in the land between the lakes. It was here the clan threw parties, used psychedelic drugs, and took part in various types of rituals. Hearing stories from Heather about suffering abuse at the hands of her father struck a chord with Rod. After Heather had to move away, Rod became obsessed with the situation and ended up racking up hundreds of dollars in long-distance phone bills for Heather's family. The final straw for Roderick was when Heather's parents finally cut her off from the phone. It was then he rallied his group to go on the fateful rescue mission to save Heather from her parents and run away to New Orleans to start their very own unique vampire family and live happily ever after. Unfortunately, things did not go according to the plan. On November 25, 1996, Rod and the gang made the 750-mile drive from Murray, Kentucky to Eustis, Florida. Picked up and their vehicle had broken down, Heather made a deal with Rod in which she would use her keys to unlock her home so that her family's vehicle could be stolen and the clan could complete their trip to New Orleans. In exchange, Rod agreed to perform the turning ritual in which she would consume his blood and officially be a vampire forever. The ritual took place early that morning in a Eustis cemetery. Rod consumed a significant amount of LSD before Heather admitted to drinking Roderick's blood from a self-inflicted razor blade wound. Shortly after that, the group departed to retrieve the car from Heather's house. Upon arriving at the Windorf residence, Roderick and Scott entered the house through the garbage to find Mr. Windorf peacefully resting on the living room couch. After many moments of silence and deliberation, Mr. Windorf awoke to his skull being violently smashed in by Roderick and the crowbar Rod had brought in with him. From more than 22 blows to his face. Hearing the noisy disturbance, Mrs. Windorf entered the living room from the kitchen. She was struck and left horrified at the sight of her husband being beaten to death by intruders. In an attempt to interrupt the despicable act, she splashed scalding hot coffee on the face of Roderick, who retaliated with a crowbar blow to her face. The blow was so hard that it severed her brainstem and killed her instantly. By that time, it was pretty obvious. I had blood on me and a crowbar in my hand. I was fixing to say, yeah, I want to have coffee with you, son of a bitching smartass. But anyway, then that's when she lunged at me. I just took the bottom of the crowbar and kept stabbing it through her skull, and whenever she fell down, I just continually beat her until I saw her brains because that pissed me off, said Roderick about the killing. Roderick and Scott proceeded to ritualistically burn their victims and dance around their bodies as they lay dying on the living room floor. Before leaving, they stole valuables such as jewelry and credit cards and eventually left in the family's Ford Explorer. The bodies were later discovered by Heather's 17-year-old sister, Jennifer. She had returned home from work that night. On the other hand, Heather assumed that everything had gone according to the plan and she was unaware of her parents being murdered. Until later when she was informed by the vampire gang. Murder warrants were put out for the group of teens on November 27th, and after 4 days of evading the law enforcement and after they tracked a phone call made by Chastity when she had called her grandparents asking for money, the vampire gang was finally captured on November 28th. At first, Roderick completely denied the accusations, claiming he was being framed by a rival vampire gang. But eventually, with an overwhelming amount of evidence piled against him, he pled guilty. He received 2 charges of first-degree murder, robbery, and burglary and was sentenced to death. This made him the youngest American to ever be on death row. Scott Anderson received 2 life sentences in prison. The amount of his involvement in the murders came under question. Though he claims that he never touched Mr. or Mrs. Windorf and attempted to calm a raging Roderick, who proceeded to go crazy and bachelor's calls in with a crowbar. Charity Kessie and Dana Cooper made plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. Charity was sentenced to 10 years in prison and Dana for 17. They were later released from prison in 2008 and 2015, respectively. Scott's sentence was recently changed in 2018 to 40 years, crediting the 22 years he has already spent in prison. By the time Scott Anderson will be released in 2032, he will be 51 years old. Roderick Farrell's death sentence was changed to life prison after the Florida Supreme Court ruled defendants must be 17 years old or older at the time charges are filed in order to be able to get executed. To this day, Roderick remains at the Tomoko Correctional Institution serving out his life sentence. But the story does not end here. Rather, it's the beginning of scandalous revelations into the world of goths and vampires made by Roderick himself during and after his trial. Roderick was interviewed and questioned by people from several professional backgrounds. Lawyers, journalists, reporters, writers, filmmakers, and even TV show creators wanted some parts of the story from Roderick. Everybody wanted to know how this criminal vampire cult went on with its operations. What rituals they believed in and carried out. How could something this unusual and strange be a reality of their surroundings? Everyone wanted to know everything about this case, and with time, the insights and information revealed into the mind of a vampire were monstrous. Frank Stanfield, the veteran reporter, revealed that at one time Rod actually believed that he was a vampire. Frank adds to this, saying that in a lot of cases he was fascinated with the gothic vamp lifestyle and convinced all those other members of the cult. He was able to manipulate other people to join his group because they were fascinated by whatever he said. Even before police began searching for Farrell and the others after the gruesome double murder, the so-called vampire had already been under investigation. From the time, Farrell had apparently once forced his way into an animal shelter in Murray, Kentucky. Once inside, he allegedly proceeded to attack dozens of dogs, killing 2 and injuring another so badly that it had to be euthanized. Perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the case was the fact that Farrell believed he was a 500-year-old vampire named Visigo. Farrell claimed he was part of a vampire cult and that the other members were part of a unique brotherhood. Farrell became obsessed with role-playing games at a young age. When he began playing Vampire the Masquerade with like-minded individuals, he developed a fascination with the idea of vampirism. By the time he was 16, Farrell had become a highly destructive young man. The teenager was not just using drugs, but had turned his bedroom into a shrine occult. Court documents claimed he had been observed taking part in satanic rituals and self-harm, going as far as to carve an upside-down cross onto his own chest. Everything I was listening to was dark. It was based upon hate, war, death, pain. That's all my music. All my movies that I watched. My bedroom was an array of the darker side of the occult, such as the Necronomicon, the Satanic Bible. I had upside-down crosses. I had broken shards of glass laying about in the corner. I had hooks and metal cables wrapped around looking like Hellraiser, said Farrell in an interview with Crime Watch Daily. If this couldn't be any more disturbing, Gibson, Farrell's mother, was charged with soliciting rape and soliciting sodomy on November 12, 1996. Gibson sent sexually explicit letters to a 14-year-old Jamie. Jamie's mother pressed charges after her son showed her the letters. She also found out that Gibson set up a shrine in her home with pictures of Jamie, candles, and incense. According to a December 2019 Daily Commercial article, Farrell made a tearful apology to the victims' families. While incarcerated, Farrell took some classes and got a wastewater treatment license. Gibson said that a lot of women write to him. He's been married and divorced during the course of his imprisonment. His current fiancée showed up at one hearing. She said that if released, she would take Farrell in and help him find a job. Gibson said that she was living with her mother, started a jewelry business, and is even considering attending church. Her father, Farrell's grandfather who assaulted him, has dementia and is living in a facility. As I've gotten older, I've learned that it's very important to live a decent life. You can't really make a difference, stated Gibson. Mental health experts later testified in the resentencing hearing of Farrell that he is not a vampire cult leader anymore and he has changed. Psychologists claim that Farrell was gang raped by his grandfather and his friends. Gibson's older sister testified during the trial in 1998 that her father had sexually abused both her and Gibson as well. Experts claim that Farrell was a child turned into a monster, that he was immature and still growing. Still, they add, it was no excuse for such criminal acts. Psychologist Heather Holmes testified that Gibson confronted the homeowner where the rape took place, with 5-year-old Farrell by her side. She thought she was sticking up for her son, but it re-traumatized him. Holmes said, would Roderick have committed these terrible deeds had he not been subject to so much trauma and torment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Imagine you're walking down the parking lot to reach your car, and suddenly something peculiar catches your eye. Peculiar not when looked from afar, but when you look close, you'd find something that would shake you from your core. A Polaroid of a girl and a young boy facing the camera. Their mouths taped and arms pressed together behind their backs as though they are tied up. What would your immediate reaction and the following action be? This is the story of Tara Calico, a bright young college student who vanished while she was out on a bike ride, leaving behind a mystery that endured for over 30 years and a notorious Polaroid that made international headlines. But who were those teenagers in the Polaroid? Were they really captives? And was the photo a clue to Calico's fate? These questions have lingered for nearly 30 years, morning in 1988. In this video, let us find out what actually happened and whether Tara Calico was finally found. 19-year-old Tara Calico from Valencia County, New Mexico was described as an ambitious person. She planned out most of her days by trying to fit in as many activities as possible, often making detailed daily schedules. She excelled in high school and was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico at Valencia, where she was studying to become a psychologist. She worked at a local bank and was also an extremely athletic young woman who enjoyed running and cycling. Her friends said that she was someone most people would absolutely admire. But the highly ambitious Tara didn't know that life always doesn't go as it is planned, and that her hobby of cycling would strangely prove to be a reason for a setback in her journey towards her ambitions. On the morning of September 20th, 1988, Tara left her home in Valencia County, New Mexico, to go for her daily bike ride. Her route was the same every day along New Mexico State Road 47. Her mother, Patty Dole, knew it very well because the pair of them often traveled together. Though lately, Patty had been skipping rides. A recent incident in which a car drove aggressively close to her, deliberately passing her multiple times, had made her nervous and less inclined towards her ride. However, Tara continued the tradition, cheerfully refusing her mother's suggestion that she should carry a mace. It was the same sunny stretch she had been riding for years, and nothing bad had ever happened. As she headed out the door, Tara jokingly told her mother that she'd better come looking for her if she didn't show up by now. Was she indirectly hinting towards something that she already knew about? Or this was just a casual talk of something might go wrong, which eventually did. Tara had a tennis date with her boyfriend at 12.30 that she was determined to keep, but noon came and went and Tara never returned home. When Tara didn't arrive home by noon from her bike ride, as told by her daughter, Patty left home to search for her daughter. She drove her car through the 17-mile bike route that Tara took but did not see her daughter. Patty then drove the bike route again to see if she could spot Tara, but it was to no avail. Worried, she called the local hospital to see if her daughter was there. Then contacted the rescue unit. This marked the beginning of one of the longest and the most unique investigations in the history of law enforcement books. Tara entered the National Crime Information Center system as a missing person, and an exhaustive 2-week search ensued, which involved state police, the military, but neither Tara nor her mother's bicycle turned up. The search team did notice bike tracks veering off the road and a Boston cassette tape, which Tara was listening to on her Walkman. In addition, they also found the front view window piece of Calico's Walkman. Investigators interviewed at least 7 individuals who reported seeing Calico on her bike ride. All of them claimed to have seen Calico riding north toward her home. Of the 7 witnesses, 5 recalled seeing an old pickup truck following Calico along the highway. They also reported seeing Calico wearing headphones and listening to her Walkman. The search party later discovered terrorist bike tracks, cassette tape, and a piece of her Walkman within a 3-mile radius from where the witnesses said they saw her. Without compelling evidence of foul play, police began to question John, Tara's father, and Patty about Tara's home life. Was their daughter happy? Did she ever talk about travel? They suspected that the 19-year-old had run away from home. A hypothesis that her family vehemently denied, describing Tara as a cheerful girl brimming with enthusiasm in her. The police had nothing in their hands to investigate, and there was no solid clue to trace Tara until nearly 9 months of Tara's disappearance, when a strange discovery gave the investigation some lead. On June 15, 1989, a Port St. Joe resident was preparing to go into a grocery store. She parked adjacent to a Toyota cargo van with a mustached man sitting inside it. After leaving the junior food store, she spotted a Polaroid photo in the space where the Toyota van had been parked minutes earlier. The woman walked over to the picture, picked it up, and stared at the image. It appeared the picture's subjects, a boy and a young woman on their backs with duct tape over their mouths, were in a small enclosed space, such as a windowless vehicle. The woman promptly took the picture to the police department, giving the officers a description of the vehicle and the man parked beside her. The police set up roadblocks in the area, hoping to question the man who was driving the Toyota, but there were no other reported sightings of him. In July 1989, the Polaroid photo appeared on an episode of a TV show called A Current Affair. Some who watched the program contacted Patty Dole, Tara's mother. Despite the photograph being found about 1,600 miles away from where she had gone missing, they thought the young woman in the photograph resembled Tara. Once Patty saw the picture, she too felt that the young lady resembled her daughter. Patty believed the woman had similar features to her daughter, noting a scar on the woman's leg was a match to the scar on Tara's leg from a past car accident. According to Patty, the book shown in the Polaroid next to the girl, a paperback copy of My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews, was one of her daughter's favorite books. But the question also was, who was that young boy alongside the girl in the Polaroid picture? Some initially believed the boy in the photo was Michael Hunley. On April 21, 1988, several months before Calico went missing, 9-year-old Michael Hunley went on a hunting trip with his father and a family friend in the Zuni Mountains of New Mexico. They were preparing to hunt wild turkey, but while setting up the camp, Michael disappeared. Michael's father immediately reported the boy missing, but a snowstorm had taken over the area, preventing a thorough search for him. Once the storm subsided, 400 people assisted in the search, but the only clue they discovered was a small footprint in the snow. In July 1989, when a Current Affair episode aired showing the Polaroid, Michael's parents saw the show and thought the little boy in the photo resembled their son. In fact, his mother stated that she was nearly certain it was Michael in the picture. It is roughly 45 miles from Belen, New Mexico, where Tara Calico vanished. It didn't take long for the investigators to see a potential connection in the disappearances. Calico's mother and the Henleys went to Port St. Joe to examine the Polaroid and talk to the police. After the meeting, the parents determined that the children were in the picture, in the Zuni Mountains. Dental records confirmed it was Michael's body and that the boy had likely succumbed to hypothermia. Investigators did not suspect foul play and concluded Michael was not the boy in the Polaroid. To figure out if Calico is the young woman in the Polaroid found in 1989, her parents had a photo analyzed by Scotland Yard in London. The lab examined the picture and however, the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico also analyzed the photo and concluded that it was not Tara Calco. The FBI conducted an independent investigation into the photograph as well, but the results were inconclusive. Investigators remain baffled by the photo. The only clue they determined from the image is that the photographer likely snapped it after May 1989, as the specific film used was unavailable until that date. In the end, only one family received answers, and there was still no clue about the whereabouts of Tara Calco. The disappearance, Tara's case remained cold in the intervening decades. In 2003, the Dolls made the decision to move 2,000 miles from their home in New Mexico to Florida. After enduring dozens of fruitless tips and appearing on countless shows such as Oprah, Unsolved Mysteries, 48 Hours, and The Current Affair to beg for news of their daughter, they decided it was time. "Here, there's not anything I can do that doesn't remind me of Tara," Patty Dole said of their home in New Mexico. But a new development emerged in 2008 when Sheriff Rene Rivera of Valencia County said he knew what happened to Calco and who did it. In an explosive revelation, Rivera claimed that 2 local boys who were in a truck accidentally ran over Calco and then 2 other men, possibly parents, assisted with helping the men hide Calco's body. Despite knowing the identities of the allegedly culpable men, Rivera explained they have made no arrests because Calco's body remains missing. In 2017, a Reddit thread about Calco included uploaded documents from the New Mexico State Police case file on Calco's disappearance. In the documents, a man named Henry Brown gave an interview with Deputy Mark Nathala, claiming he had heard some teen boys talking about hitting Calco with her truck and then sexually assaulting and slaying her. He went on to explain that the teens hid Calco's body in the bushes. But when a search party began looking for her, they moved her into a basement before later dumping her body into a pond. One of the alleged suspects named by Brown was Lawrence Romero Jr., the son of the local sheriff. It is likely Detective Rivera was referring to Romero Sr. when he mentioned in a newspaper interview that the alleged assailants got help from their family in hiding Calco's body. Romero Jr. has since passed. John Dole was angered when he learned of Rivera's claims. He said that there was no reason for the sheriff to publicly announce his suspicions if he couldn't arrest the suspects. 2 other Polaroid photographs that could have been of Tara Calco surfaced over the years. One was a blurry photo of a girl's face with tape covering her mouth, which was found near a residential construction site in Montecito. Forensic evidence suggested it was taken some time after May of 1989. The second was of a woman loosely bound with her eyes covered, sitting next to a man on an Amtrak train, dated roughly to February of 1990. No charges were ever brought as a result of either image. Patty Dole found the Montecito image compelling and believed it to be Tara. However, she didn't believe the girl on the train was her daughter. Today, Tara Calco had been missing for more than 30 years. Her disappearance remains one of the most haunting cold cases in recent memory, and at this point, it seems that only chance will turn up answers. However, Calco's sister and best friend have not given up searching for her. The 2 women stated that they have uncovered new information in 2017, and they even released the Tara Calco investigation. Podcast host Ask Bell discusses different theories regarding Calco's disappearance. On the other hand, Calco's parents passed without learning what exactly happened to their daughter. Patty Dell passed in May 2006, while Calco's father David passed 4 years prior to November 2002. In October 2019, the FBI announced a reward of up to $1 for anyone who had information that would lead to the location of Tara Calco or the arrest of those responsible for her disappearance. What do you guys think? What happened to Tara Calco? Was she really abducted, or did she actually run away staging her kidnapping? Is she even alive? Or was this case a cover-up by a detective and his son? And what about those Polaroids? Can you solve this mystery and bag the $20,000 from the FBI? Maybe you can. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Every love story is not a bed full of roses. Some turn into a horrific nightmare that one can never forget. The story that I'm about to tell you today is enough to send shivers down your spine and also to make you believe that life is not all fairy tale. Jodi Arias, a charismatic young woman in her 20s. She was a gorgeous blonde with a smart personality and witty mind. She was born on July 9, 1980 in Salinas, California. She was the most loved child among her 4 brothers and sisters. Her parents adored her in every possible manner. She loved photography and had taken up this hobby to start a career in it. She left her high school and began her career as a full-time photographer. But certainly, life had other plans for her. Despite her intense passion for photography, she kept on failing and could not make a living out of it. In order to survive, she had to leave photography. Later, she took up a job as a waitress in a nearby restaurant, but her love for photography never ceased. Jody was 21 years old when she began working as a waitress in a renowned restaurant in California. It was then when she met her very first boyfriend. Daryl Brewer was a 40-year-old man when he started dating Jody. Things seemed to be pretty casual at first, but as time passed, both of them came into a serious relationship. The relationship was quite odd as Daryl was older than Jody. Her friends often told her she deserved better, but still, she went on pursuing the relationship anyway. Things were going pretty smooth and almost a year had passed when Jody started working at prepaid legal services along with her job as a waitress. Both Jody and Daryl had moved into a home together in 2005, so Jody needed to work 2 jobs in order to keep up with the expenses. This was the time when a young man named Travis Alexander caught Jody's eye. Daryl and Jody had major age differences, because of which Jody was having second thoughts about continuing her relationship with Daryl. She was more prone to cheating and deceiving her boyfriend than anyone else. Her vulnerability spoke volumes, and she found herself attracted to the young man Travis Alexander. Travis Alexander was born on July 28, 1977 in Riverside, California. He was one of the 8 children of his parents, but after his father's untimely death, he was sent to live with his grandparents. Travis was a very religious man and was an avid member of the Mormon Church. He was a motivational speaker, alongside a legal insurance salesman at the time he met Jody. A conference was held in the summer of 2006 in Las Vegas, which was attended by both Jody and Travis. It was not long until Jody caught the eye of the young speaker. They both had immense interest in one another, which resulted in Jody's relationship. With following this attraction between Jody and Travis, Daryl suffered major consequences as fights began to happen between him and Jody. He knew for sure that their age difference was a problem, but did not think that it would lead them to a breakup. Few months later, Daryl and Jody called it quits, and Daryl moved out of their shared home. Later, that home, since it wasn't owned by anybody, it went to the foster funds of the community. By February 2006, Travis and Jody had already started dating. Due to Travis' faith, he baptized Jody into his Mormon faith, and they both continued to be in a relationship. 5 months later, the couple mysteriously broke up. Travis's friends reported that they were never fond of Jody, as she was very possessive when it came to her boyfriend. She wanted to mark her territory, as she was more into Travis than he was into her. Her extreme possessiveness led the couple to a breakup. According to several of Travis's friends, Arias would follow him to the bathroom and wait outside the door, and forward his private emails with other people to herself. And that was just the beginning. Alexander's friends, Kyle Lovinger Hughes, told ABC News she started seeing things that were just disturbing. "I said, Travis, I'm afraid we're gonna find you chopped up in her freezer." From very early on, she was completely obsessed with him. Her husband, Chris Hughes, said on one occasion Hughes was present when Alexander caught her eavesdropping on him from behind a closed door. There was a rage in her eyes. "Sky and I are very frightened at this point. She might burn down our house, with all of us in it," Hughes said. The shocking thing was that Travis and Jody kept on having physical relationships even after their breakup. Travis wanted to marry a virgin Mormon girl, whereas he had broken this vow with Jody. According to him, Jody was not suitable for marriage anymore, but he did not want to give up on the amazing sexual relations they both had. Meanwhile, Jody was obsessed with Travis. She had assumed that he was the love of her life. She would stalk him at night. She even moved into the same city as Travis after their breakup. Travis only wanted physical relations, while Jody wanted him all. The secret relationship continued until in 2007, Travis started dating someone new. This irritated Jody, and she started sending threatening emails to his new girlfriend. She wanted Travis to be his own. She even burst the tires of Travis' cars twice, so he would stop going to see that woman he was dating. Many friends advised Travis to stay away from her, but he never listened. The pair continued to exchange flirty texts and emails and kept on with their physical intimacy for the time being. The summer of 2007 was proceeding when Jody and Travis had a huge argument. Jody had tried to break into Travis' Facebook account, which led him to be furious. They both exchanged many hurtful texts, and Travis asked her to stay away from him. This was his final call towards Jody that everything they had was going to end this time. But Jody had other plans for him. It was the month of June when the company Travis worked at arranged a trip to Cancun, Mexico. He was allowed to bring one friend on the trip. Instead of choosing Jody, he chose a woman named Mimi who he was trying to date at that time. This caught Jody by surprise and she was ready to take an action that would end horribly. Meanwhile, Travis and his new friend Mimi were excited about this trip without even knowing what awaited them. On May 28th, Aria's grandparents' home was burglarized. One of the items that was stolen was a .25 caliber automatic Colt pistol, which was never recovered. Arias tried to get a hold of Alexander on June 2nd, but he did not answer. The two eventually spoke for about 18 minutes on one phone call and on a second one that lasted for 41 minutes. She sat out in the early hours of the morning to drive south to rent a car for a trip to Utah. On June 2, 2007, the very same day, Jody rented a car and drove to Travis' apartment out of the blue. For some reason, she had taken her camera with her. That day, instead of letting her go, Travis invited her into his apartment. She went in and the pair had sex many times. They both took many explicit photos of one another through Jody's camera. They both enjoyed a good shower and caressed one another many times. But nobody knew that this would be the last photo of Travis alive. They both shared a good time with one another until Jody decided to end Travis's life out of pure jealousy and hatred for taking another woman to his trip. She stabbed him 27 times and shot him straight into his head until Travis could not breathe anymore. There was blood everywhere in the shower as she had stabbed him while he was taking a shower. After committing such a hideous crime, Jody went on to discard her camera, but unfortunately she left it in the laundry. The camera had all the evidence and would later be used in the court against Jody. She also went to her apartment and dyed her hair from blonde to brunette in hopes that nobody would recognize her. Many days had passed and Travis' friends and coworkers got worried after Travis did not show up for his trip. His soon-to-be girlfriend, Mimi, went to check up on him and to her shock, she found Travis dead in his bathroom. His friends immediately dialed 911 and pointed out Arias as a suspect, citing that Alexander had mentioned she would stalk him, hack his Facebook, and had previously slashed his tires. A friend of ours is dead in his bedroom. We hadn't heard from him for a while. A woman identified as Marie Hall said, "We think he's dead. There's lots of blood." His roommate went in and there's blood in his bedroom, behind the door, and all over. Then they went in the bathroom and it's all in the shower. When Massa Police Detective Esteban Flores arrived on the scene, he told 20 to 20 that blood was everywhere. Photographic evidence showed blood spattered on the sink, walls, and floors. They also found DNA linking areas to the crime scene. She was accused of violently attacking Alexander in a jealous rage after he wanted to end their affair and plan a trip to Mexico with another woman. It was a clear case of homicide. The police started questioning everyone and the main suspect was Jody. Everybody told the police how she used to constantly stalk Travis out of extreme obsession with him. Jody voluntarily went to the police station to give her DNA samples and told the police that she had not seen Travis since April. The police knew it was all a white lie as they had found the camera that had all the evidence of when Jody met Travis. On June 21, 2008, Travis' funeral was held and 6 days later, Jody was arrested. Her lies were uncovered, as the DNA samples matched a hair strand and blood that was found beside Travis' dead body. Long hours of interrogation were conducted with Jody, but she never confessed to murdering her ex-boyfriend. She was resistant, but the jury had all the evidence they needed to prove her guilty. She gave many interviews and told the story of how Travis was her best friend and how she loved and respected him. She also denied having seen Alexander on the day that he died, then claimed 2 men had killed him in a home invasion before changing her story again to self-defense. This was just a way of swaying away the attention of the media from the actual topic. Jody pleaded not guilty after being extracted from California to Arizona. This meant that she was going on a trial. Her story was weak as she kept changing it. One time she said that she had not seen Travis since April, and the next moment she said that she had called him 2 days before his murder. In another account, she tried to portray Travis as an abusive boyfriend and said that she killed him in her defense. All of this did not work. Finally, on May 7, 2013, Jody was found guilty of first-degree homicide and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors had sought the death penalty but didn't secure enough juror votes to achieve it. At the time, Arias expressed her preference for execution. "Death is the ultimate freedom," she said during a television interview after the verdict. "I'd rather just have my freedom as soon as I can get it." This brought justice to the family of Travis. But the void that had been left in their lives was never going to be fulfilled, as Travis was never going to come back again. Such stories make you scared of falling in love, as they seem quite horrible when it comes to their manifestations, but this is the world we live in. She disappeared while walking to school. After she realized she had forgotten something at home, she turned back and took a shortcut through the woods, where she was confronted by a man who had been shot before shooting her 2 times. When police arrived at the scene, they found her dead in her bedroom. She was lying face down on the bed. She had been stabbed to death. For more than a decade after her mother died, there was no person of interest, little evidence, and a murder victim with no justice. He was shot dead in the chest on the night of August 24, 2018. He was immediately taken to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced deceased. Some cases take decades to come to their resolution and go cold when the investigative techniques are exhausted because of lack of technological and forensic advancements. But as time goes on and the forensic technologies progress, these cases often come to their resolution to provide closure to ones involved. Today in this video, we are going to look at 3 of such cold cases which came to their resolution years after the crime was committed. These will make you wonder what would have happened if there had been no advancement in technology. And despite committing such horrific and scandalous crimes, would these criminals have been free all their lives? And what do the authorities do when they are left with the prime suspect who isn't alive anymore to be prosecuted? So without further ado, let's get into these 3 cold cases solved in 2022. This is the story of an 18-year-old Anita Knudsen, a student at Monash University who was killed nearly 15 years ago. She was found stabbed to the in her apartment on June 4, 2007. Years later, after the case went cold, it was found out that her roommate was involved in the murder. If somebody was being picked on, she would stand behind him. When she was in high school, it was a girl that the principal sent her home because Anita Knudsen was living away from home, but she was close to their tightly knit family. She was known to be a person who would make anyone who talked to her comfortable and like the most important person in the world. On June 4, 2007, after not hearing from Anita, Gordon Knudsen, her father, grew worried about his oldest daughter. He went to her apartment. Anita's car was parked outside and the apartment was locked. The apartment manager let him in the apartment, where he discovered something which he would never have wished in his entire life to see. Anita's father showed police a sliced window screen that led to her bedroom window. When police arrived at the scene, they found nuts and stabbed to death in her bedroom, covered with a large housecoat. Nothing appeared to have been taken from the apartment except for the removed window screen from the teen's bedroom and the murder weapon. A few years later, Anita's death was followed by another tragedy in the Knudsen family. This time it was their brother Daniel. What haunts me most about the death of my sister is that whoever killed also took the life of my brother that very day, Anna Knudsen, Anita's sister, said. She said that after Anita was killed, their brother was never the same. He died by suicide in 2013. The case captured national attention, and billboards featuring Knudsen had been posted around the area for years in an effort to assist in finding her killer. But the killer would not be found until 15 years from the death of Anita Knudsen. For more than a decade after Anita's murder, there was no person of interest announced. There was little evidence and a murder victim with no justice. But 4 years later, a break was made. The police tried to actively investigate Anita's case for the past few years, and finally, with the help of a show called Cold Justice, they were able to move forward and regain focus on the case. Due to resources, logistics, planning, and experts, the show was able to provide, and police were able to obtain an arrest warrant. The Mana Police Department said that Nicole Rice, 34 years old, was in custody in relation to Anita's murder. Rice was at work on Mana Air Force Base as a civilian when she was arrested. At a press conference, police said they weren't able to share details of the break that led to Rice's arrest, but would release more information at a later date. Rice, who was Knudsen's roommate at the time of her death, is charged with murder, which is a Class A felony, and is being held at the Ward County Jail. There was never enough to arrest her, but I would say she was always a person of interest in the case, said Police Chief John Klug. Rice made her initial appearance by video at the Ward County Courthouse. The judge set Rice's bond at $120,000 or a $250,000 surety bond. On April 21, 2022, Rice will be back in court for her preliminary hearing and arraignment. The authorities claim that the turning point in this case was really just trying to pull all the information together and put it in an order that made sense. As they said, a lot of information was information that they had. It just took a little bit of refocusing and a lot of paying attention to the fine details. My heart goes out to the family. I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time I'm glad to say that we have the person responsible for the murder of Anita Knudsen in custody, said Chief John Kluge while finally closing the case. In 2018, the Austin Police Department said that officers were called out to the 1600 block of Mearns Meadow Boulevard for reports of shots fired just before 10:30 p.m. on August 24th. When the police arrived, they found 23-year-old Jonathan Rogers on the sidewalk with obvious trauma. He was immediately transported to Del Seton University Medical Center where he died from a gunshot wound to his chest. Following an investigation by the Austin Police Department, an arrest warrant was issued on December 8, 2021. A U.S. Marshal-led task force arrested 25-year-old DeAndre Eric Connor on a capital murder charge in link to the case. After being contacted by the APD for assistance in Connor's arrest, members of the task force developed information that he was still in the Austin area. Connor was observed at an apartment complex off Runberg Lane where he was surrounded and arrested without incident. Connor was taken to the Travis County Jail where he'll await judicial proceedings. Unfortunately, this was all the information that I could find on the internet about the case of Jonathan Rogers. Cases like Jonathan's are far too common in the United States. Stories like his also receive far less media attention on average, making the process of finding sufficient information about him tedious and difficult. It is unfortunate that not only is justice being served slowly, but that Jonathan's story is also steadily being forgotten. This is the story of a 1995 cold case murder of a 14-year-old Atlanta girl, which was solved after more than 25 years thanks to DNA and genealogy technology. She dreamt of being a doctor and was days away from middle school graduation. Nicole Smith was excited to shop for a pretty white dress to wear to the ceremony, but it turned out that she had a dark and sad ending to her fortunes. On June 7, 1995, Nicole Smith was walking to school with her sister, but forgot something and walked through the woods to return home. In the woods, she was confronted by a man who brutally assaulted her twice in the face. Two security guards at a nearby apartment complex heard the shots and ran into the woods where they found Nicole and her book bag, which contained her identification and address. Nicole's mother said that she had heard the gunshots, followed by the sound of a police helicopter. There was a knock on her door, and when she opened it, two Atlanta police officers told Smith that Nicole had been killed. Smith identified her daughter at a funeral home. "I saw that she had cried and had tears dried up on her face," Smith said. Immediately after her body was found, a massive investigation was launched. The case was a priority for Atlanta police, but eventually the investigation went cold as the authorities could not name a suspect for a very long time and the investigative techniques got exhausted. Despite interviewing hundreds of people and taking blood samples from at least 50 people, the police could not find a solid lead to take the case forward and name a prime suspect. This was therefore closed with no hope of finding the suspect. On Detective Vince Velasquez's sheer motivation, the case was reopened by him in 2002, even after encountering no leads for almost 2 years. In 2004, the case took a turn when another young girl had been assaulted in East Point, Georgia, and managed to survive to report to the investigative authorities. Immediately after, 13-year-old Betty Brown reached out to the authorities. They took no time in collecting DNA samples from her crime scene and sending it to the genealogy department for identification. As it turned out, the samples from Smith and Brown's crime scenes matched, giving the authorities a sliver of hope that the suspect had not eloped and was still around. After having the information that the suspect of both crimes was the same man, the police left no stone unturned in finding out his description. Brown showed her whole support to the Smith family by agreeing to be part of the investigation and helping the authorities draw the sketch of the suspect. The case has not died, Velasquez stated in a conference after taking retirement in 2017 and handing over the case to Scott D. Meester, who was a homicide detective on the cold case squad with the Atlanta Police Department. However, years passed on and there was no sign or identification of the suspect. Finally, after roughly 3 years, the assailant was brought into the bigger picture as a figure of interest with the support of outside genealogy and ancestry databases. According to D. Meester, investigators were able to put an end to their long-lost hope after they were alerted just before the day of Christmas that the DNA on the two crime scenes indeed matched that of a man named Arnold. Shockingly, the detectives found out that Arnold had been dead for a few months due to liver and kidney failure in a hospice facility. "Today, for me, is a bittersweet moment," Nicole's mother, Aquanelia Smith, said on the day of the press conferences. "So many unanswered questions I had for him," she said while breaking down. Brown was also present there, and he tested how long it took for the investigation to complete. What do you guys think? Does the cold cases which take decades to come to their resolution and the killer has already died of natural causes actually provide justice to the victim? Can families actually heal after decades of trauma and longing for closure? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. When a 9-year-old girl went missing in St. Anne, Missouri in 1993, an entire community feared for their children. Just 9 days later, a family's worst nightmare became a reality when the little girl was found murdered. Detectives and members of the Major Case Squad worked tirelessly to solve the homicide, but justice would not come for little Angie Houseman for 25 years. This is the case of a little girl lost. The Angie Houseman story. Police in Missouri saw the 20-year-old cold case after a woman told officers that her husband had murdered both victims and burned their bodies. The woman told the FBI that her late husband had killed Angela McCox and her 4-year-old son Thomas Michael Ratkew and disposed of their bodies in a furnace attached to their farmhouse. She told authorities she had not come forward with the shocking information before because she feared for her life. The grisly murders are believed to have taken place at her farm in Missouri in December 2002. Look into the detailed events of 2 cold cases that show how it took decades to bring the perpetrator to justice. As the police crumbled forces to locate the bodies, a gruesome discovery turned these cases into horrific homicides. Several days after being reported missing, the bodies were found in the wilderness. These are one of the most high-profile criminal cases in the region for the last 30 years. But how did these victims die? Who were Angie Houseman and Angela McCox? Who killed them? And where are the killers now? To answer these questions, let's take a detailed look into these cases and find out how the word stranger danger became a prevalent phrase among the children. Had Earl Cox's car not broken down on November 8, 1993, 9-year-old Angie Houseman might still be alive. This is the typical child kidnapping case that you think about, the one you hear your parents warn you about when you were a kid. Angie Houseman was a cheerful and kind-hearted 9-year-old in love with life. She resided in St. Anne in St. Charles County, Missouri with her parents. She was considered to be quite a gifted student. She was loved both at school and at home. Angie was always ready to make people smile, which made accepting her gruesome death even more difficult. She was born on February 18, 1984. Her mother Diana Houseman married her stepfather Ronald Bone when Angie was just a toddler. Angie became a big sister to Ronald Bone Jr. Angie disappeared off the face of the earth on November 18, 1993 when she was returning home from school. On that day, she got off the school bus like she did each afternoon in her neighborhood. Normally, 2 parents in the community would watch as the kids walked home on that street in St. Anne. However, on this day, both parents were busy and no one was watching the children as they walked home. To get home. She didn't know that this distance would turn out to be an opportunity for someone who had eyes on her. She made it past the 4th house and then seemed to vanish. Kids in the neighborhood did not recall seeing where Angie went or who she was with. She was just there 1 minute and gone the next. When it took more than 30 minutes for Angie to return home after school, her mother and stepfather became concerned. Angie was outgoing and would often stop to chat with neighbors along her way home, but it had never taken this long before. They began to search the neighborhood, but there was no sign of Angie. The parents quickly reported their child as missing and an investigation began. Including Angie's parents, the police initially did not rule anyone out as a person of interest. They interrogated her stepfather Ron for a significant amount of time. He even took a polygraph test. The massive ground searches and interrogations of family members and neighbors failed to produce any leads. On November 21st, the FBI joined the search. Despite the missing person case not fitting the criteria, for only the 2nd time in history, the Major Case Squad was called in to assist in the investigation. While the massive search ensued, police received hundreds of tips from all over the St. Louis area. An attempted abduction nearby was reported just a week before Angie's disappearance, but unlike Angie, that girl was able to escape. In the area, who had been driving a blue car. A police catch was produced, but these clues didn't lead to a suspect or to Angie. Psychics began to produce their own theories, and one claimed to dream about the police finding Angie's body in the August Bush wildlife area. Strangely, this dream or a prophecy would turn out to be real just 9 days after she disappeared. On November 7, 1993, a deer hunter found Angie Hausman's remains in the August Busch Wildlife Area, almost exactly where the psychic said she would be found. On reaching the spot, the police found a heartbreaking and horrible sight. Angie was left there entirely without clothes and tied to a tree. According to medical experts, the young girl was found just hours after passing away. Investigators believed Angie was still alive when her murderer left her there. However, the cold affected her terribly and small bits of ice formed all over her body, making Angie suffer a terrible death. Additionally, an autopsy later revealed that she was ing assaulted before being left in the wild. This missing person case had now turned into a homicide case. In the days that she was missing and was severely dehydrated, her hair had been cut and colored. She had been held for some time before her body was put in the woods. Her autopsy determined that Angie likely died just hours before her body was found, and the official cause of death of hypothermia. She froze to death after being left naked and tied to a tree following a week of pure hell. Some forensic clues were retrieved from the examination, including a fingerprint on a duct tape that covered her mouth. Early clues in the investigation included Angie's teacher giving an alarming statement. She said that Angie told her that her uncle was taking her for a visit to the countryside, but there was no uncle. None of Angie's friends or classmates knew who this uncle was. Then 4 days after Angie's body was found, appeared from Hazelwood, Missouri. Hazelwood is about 10 miles from St. Anne, and the police feared that there was a serial predator in the area, and these fears intensified when the second girl was also found murdered. However, this case was solved in early 1994 and was not connected to Angie's case after all. The FBI profiled Angie's killer and described him as a white male, aged 20 to 45, monthly lost his job. And who doesn't get along well with women? This profile was made public and thousands of leads came in. In total, 200 men were considered suspects and ruled out as the perpetrator in Angie's case. One of those men was a man from Florida named John Wayne Parsons. John Wayne admitted to molesting 2 9-year-old girls in Florida and another young girl in Potosi, Missouri when he was arrested in Florida on sex offenses against minors. Several newspapers clippings were found on the Angie Hausman case. However, forensics ruled out John Wayne in this case. Another man gave a deathbed confession to the crime, but he was in prison at the time of the murder and was also ruled out. In 2001, a man named Corey Lynn Fox came forward and claimed to have murdered Angie. He even had some details of the crime that matched. For example, he was able to describe Angie's Barbie underwear in great detail. Fox also confessed to dozens of other murders, including claiming to have murdered Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan. Only Mel Carnahan died in a plane crash. Crimes he confessed to, including Angie Hausman's murder. Police say that press coverage of the story was too intense when Angie was murdered, so the details of her underwear were likely read in the newspaper. The years continued to pass by, and Angie's case remained unsolved. Anyone living in the St. Louis area remembers the news coverage throughout the years, reminding the community that Angie's murder remained unsolved. Angie went on to have 2 more siblings that would never get to know their big sister. In 2016, Angie's mother tragically passed away from cancer. She passed away before the police were able to bring her daughter's murderer to justice. Unfortunately, the case sat unsolved for decades, and although the police kept getting several tips that were diligently followed, they all turned out to be dead ends. However, the detectives never gave up hope. In 2018, police in St. Charles County decided to reevaluate Angie's case. In 2019, DNA testing was performed on the evidence from the crime, where was analyzed using advanced technology and produced the profile of a male suspect. When the DNA matched the man in federal custody, the detectives were shocked. After 25 years, police knew who killed Angie Hausman. On March 1, 2019, police identified Earl Cox as Angie's killer. Earl Cox was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1975, he graduated from Jennings High School. After high school, he enrolled in the United States Air Force. In the Air Force, Cox worked as a computer operator and was stationed in Frankfurt, Germany. In 1982, Earl Cox was court-martialed for sexually abusing 4 girls under the age of 11 while stationed in Germany. He was dishonorably discharged and sentenced to 8 years at Fort Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. He was paroled in 1985 and returned to the St. Louis area in 1989. Earl Cox was arrested in Overland after taking two even-year-old girls to the movies and a park which coincidentally is right behind Angie's school. Despite the sexual assault allegations, those charges were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence in 1991. However, his arrest was enough to revoke his parole and he was locked back up. He was released again in 1992. Upon release, he again returned to the St. Louis area. On November 18, 1993, Earl was driving to his sister's house, which happened to be near Angie's bus stop. His car was acting up, so he stopped to look under the hood. He said he saw this cool bus and watched as Angie Houseman exited the bus. When Angie walked past, he asked the little girl if she was hungry. Angie said she was cold and hungry and agreed to get in Earl's truck. He took her to Burger King and bought her food. He then drove around with the girl and eventually took her back to his home. He later claimed that after kidnapping Angie, he kept her hidden in his mobile home even without the knowledge of his then-living girlfriend. The girl also confirmed that she was not allowed to enter one of the rooms in their house. Angie's last few days on Earth were terrifying as she was repeatedly assaulted and tortured before her killer decided to leave her out in the cold to die. Ultimately, based on the DNA evidence, the police were able to arrest Earl Cox and charge him with murder. Once produced in court, Earl Cox decided to enter a plea agreement wherein the prosecution would take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a guilty plea. He subsequently pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and sexual abuse. Based on his plea, in August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murder, with an additional 7 years for sexual abuse. A few months later, in March 2021, he further pleaded guilty through an Alford plea to molesting a child just 4 years before Angie's disappearance. As a result, he was convicted on 4 counts of sodomy against a victim under 14, which got him a total of 40 years added to his sentence. As of today, Earl Webster Cox remains incarcerated at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bontero, Missouri. This is the case of Angela Mack Cox and her 4-year-old son Thomas Michael Resha, who disappeared and was later found to be murdered in 2002. The case now appears to have finally been solved, but the killer can't go to jail. In this story, a woman confessed to authorities that an Arkansas mother and son missing for almost 20 years were murdered by her husband. On September 1, 2002, Tommy Resha, the father of Thomas Michael Resha, gave a missing person report to then-sailing police chief Albert Rourke. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children contacted FCSO investigator Dale Weaver about a message received regarding the missing child and his mother, Angela Mack Cox. Weaver interviewed Angela's friends and family during the process and learned that Angela married James Cox on April 10, 2002. She had remarried when life began to spiral downward. Previously, she was wed to Tommy Resha, who had filed the first missing person report. The police found out that on May 29, 2002, Angela and James were involved in an accident which resulted in multiple deaths. The newlyweds were briefly hospitalized as a result of the accident. While the couple was recuperating, James' brother Jeremy Cox picked up Angela and Mickey. Their trip took an immediate turn for the worse when Jeremy was arrested for being in possession of a stolen vehicle. That left Angela and Mikey stranded in Elton, Missouri. Roughly 2 weeks later, James received a phone call from Angela. Weirdly, she was in California at the time. She was happy and apparently sounded like herself. She wanted to come home. But James never saw or spoke to his wife ever again. Authorities say that while floating around in Missouri for a while, Angela and Mikey came into contact with the brothers Dale and Clarence Krausen. Jeremy was looking for some cattle work. He knew Dale but did not know Clarence very well. Clarence and Barbara Krausen got to know Angela and Mikey pretty well during this time period. However, the 3 adults came to an adoption agreement. The Krausens would raise Mikey as their own and Angela was off on her own. The circumstances of what led to that initial decision have yet to be released, though Jeremy Cox told investigators that he later heard that Angela had told her son, Mikey, to the Krausens. But while in California, Angela changed her mind. She wanted her son back and she was ready to be back with her new husband. But it never happened. Both mother and son were quickly murdered after that. The mother and child were murdered in later 2002 or early 2003 before being placed in a furnace and burned away into nothing. Even the farmhouse furnace removed their bodies from the earth along with all evidence of the crime, which was no longer available. During the investigation, Detective Weaver learned that Mikey had been seen several times by different people with Clarence and Barbara Krausen, who lived in the Elton area, although this was claimed to be a rumor later. Angela's mother Lorna Poole stated that the last time her daughter had contacted her was on December 11, 2002. Angela was in Chowchilla, California and was going to be leaving Chowchilla to pick up Mikey from Clarence and Alton. A week later, Poole called her daughter, but from the other side of the call, she was told that she had left. Poole then called Clarence. He told Poole that Jeremy Cox picked up Angela and Mikey and that he and his wife would be adopting Mikey with Angela's permission. But Poole later found out that Jeremy could not have picked up Angela because he was in jail at the time. Between 2004 and 2005, Clarence and Barbara moved back to Virginia. Missouri State Police indicted Clarence for firearms violations and was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He served 8 years in prison and was paroled out in Texas. He was later shot dead on February 12, 2012 in Laredo, Texas by William Henry Johnson. Weaver contacted Barbara Cruzen. She told Weaver that she met Angela in the fall of 2002 while Angela was working for Clarence on their farm. Later, Angela brought Mikey to their house and they kept him for a while and they made adoption arrangements. Barbara stated that the documents were signed by all three parties. Angela then headed to Chowchilla, California and worked at a Burger King. Angela changed her mind about the adoption. Both Barbara and Clarence were not pleased and told her to come back and pick up the child. The crew sent money for Angela to return twice. On the second time receiving funds, Angela returned to Springfield, Missouri. Barbara told Weaver she met Angela at the Springfield bus stop, however. The following day, they returned to the farm, met Clarence and Mikey there, and stayed in for the evening. The next morning, Barbara said Angela and Mikey were gone. Clarence told Barbara that someone came and picked them up, but she didn't hear any vehicle come or go from the residence that night or the next morning. Weaver asked the Virginia FBI to polygraph Barbara Cruzen at her hometown and the FBI agreed. FBI out of the Norfolk office did a pre-polygraph interview with Barbara and an exam which she failed in reference to knowing what happened to Angela and Mikey. In a post-polygraph interview, Barbara told the agents that Clarence had told her that he had done away with Angela McCox and Thomas Michael Ratu by killing them and destroying their bodies in a furnace that was attached to their farmhouse. She said when they moved from the farmhouse to the house in Alton that Clarence told her they had to move the furnace out of there since it was used to destroy the bodies of Angela and Mikey. Weaver spoke to Barbara, who gave him the same information that Clarence told him he had killed them and destroyed their bodies. She said they moved from the farmhouse and told her the furnace had to go because of what it had been used for. The Oregon County, Missouri Sheriff King was contacted and provided assistance in the case, along with the Oregon County State's Attorney, the Arkansas State Police, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For Angela, Tiffany Thomas founded a Facebook page called Justice for Angie. Tiffany made it her mission to find her missing school friend and did not let Angie be forgotten. Tiffany appreciated the information on the case. She said that it's good to have some answers that she had been waiting for, but these were not the answers she was hoping for. The Sheriff's Department now says it considers the case solved. These cases were able to be closed by the authorities in some unusual ways. Though it took a long time for the detectives to track the person responsible, it would be counted as just deserved. What do you think about these two cold cases which were high profile and especially victimized children? What could be the reason for such increasing crime and abuse directed towards children and, to be precise, mostly female children? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.